Now, if you're a fan of ancient aliens, I'm quite certain that you've heard that there are UFOs in the Bible. The most famous alleged example is probably Ezekiel chapter 1. As I gazed on the creatures, I saw one wheel on the ground next to each of the four-faced creatures. The description makes it clear that the cherubim and the wheels were not identical objects. Well, it may sound startling, but we actually do know what it looked like because we have pictures. We're covered all over with eyes.
Dr. Michael Heiser explains Ezekiel in the visions that he had, whether or not they were UFOs or not. So let's get right into it, guys. Let me tell you, this is absolutely fascinating, and buckle your seats because it's gonna blow you away. Let's get into it.
Now, if you're a fan of ancient aliens, I'm quite certain that you've heard that there are UFOs in the Bible. Yep, you knew we would get here at some point. The most famous alleged example is probably Ezekiel chapter 1. The idea is that the prophet saw a UFO, and it's been popularized by ancient alien theorists like Erich von Daniken in Chariots of the Gods, and a book written by Joseph H. Blumrich, a former, now deceased, NASA engineer. Blumrich's book, written after leaving NASA, made headlines across the United States. People presumed that since Blumrich had worked for NASA, he has to be correct here. But is that conclusion really logical? Sure, if you work for NASA, you're smart, but does being competent in engineering and physics, fields like that are entrenched in the hard sciences, does that equip you for having skills in biblical exegesis and interpretation? It's a fair question.
No.
We might also ask, did Blumrich even know Hebrew? Was he competent at all in ancient Near Eastern contexts? Recall that Ezekiel was, after all, writing from Babylon, as Ezekiel chapter 1 makes perfectly clear. Or is it more likely, after having spent years seeing craft like the lunar module, that Blumrich's work environment influenced what he saw in his mind's eye while reading Ezekiel 1. On the other hand, again to be fair, if Ezekiel didn't see an alien spaceship, what in the world did he see? Well, if you're wondering any of these questions, you've come to the right place. Now, despite the fact that it's kind of funny to think that a NASA engineer would think that an interstellar spacecraft would be flying under the power of an internal combustion engine with propellers, and I'm not making that up, you can look at the cover of Blumrich's book to see what he thought Ezekiel was describing. Despite all that, we need to treat the topic seriously. Ezekiel 1 is used by every ancient astronaut theorist to prop up the idea that aliens have not only visited here, but they were part of biblical history.
Right.
So it's...
Don't get me wrong, though. It is a wild and fascinating book. When he's like, and I looked up and I saw chariots, something like chariots, some wheels. And when people are saying, what is like a wheel? What is like a wheel? A spaceship! But no. And Joe Rogan even thinks this, or he did. He's like, that sounds a lot like a spaceship.
To think through the issue and not poke fun at it. The first thing we need to do is get the elements of Ezekiel's vision in our heads. It's a long chapter, so if you want to read the whole chapter, you can do that. But here are some relevant portions from Ezekiel chapter 1, and I'm drawing these from the Jewish Publication Society English translation of the Hebrew Bible. And we'll begin in Ezekiel 1, verse 4. The scripture says, I looked, and lo, a stormy wind came sweeping out of the north, a huge cloud and flashing fire surrounded by a radiance. And in the center of it, in the center of the fire, a gleam as of amber. To the center of it were also the figures of four creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the figures of human beings. However, each had four faces, and each of them had four wings. The legs of each were fused into a single rigid leg.
Talk about trippy. If someone said that now, we would all accuse them of being on drugs. We would be like, what are you doing, brother? What kind of drug were you on? That's messed up. What would you guys think if you saw that today?
And the feet of each were like a single calf's hoof. and their sparkle was like the luster of burnished bronze. They had human hands below their wings. The 4 of them had their faces and their wings on their 4 sides. Each one's wings touched those of the other. They did not turn when they moved. Each could move in the direction of any of its faces. Each of them had a human face at the front. Each of the 4 had the face of a lion on the right. Each of the 4 had the face of an ox on the left. And each of the 4 had the face of an eagle at the back.
Wow.
Such were their faces. As for their wings, they were separated. Above, each had 2 touching those of the others, while the other 2 covered its body. And each could move in the direction of any of its faces. They went wherever the Spirit impelled them to go, without...
That's so weird. What does that mean? They went any direction that their faces were facing. Of course, you have 4 faces and you can face any way. What does that mean? You can just go back and forth, sideways and sideways, super fast or something like that? He doesn't have to turn around?
When they moved. Such then was the appearance of the creatures. With them was something that looked like burning coals of fire. This fire, suggestive of torches, kept moving about among the creatures. The fire had a radiance, and lightning issued from the fire. Dashing to and fro among the creatures was something that looked like flares. As I gazed on the creatures, I saw 1 wheel on the ground next to each of the 4-faced creatures. As for the appearance and the structure of the wheels, they gleamed like beryl.
There you go. There's the wheels. There's the wheels. You're telling me that there's flying saucers in the Bible. But does it make you think, though? When people constantly always say something like a flying saucer, something like a circular type machine flying around, are those the same things that people are seeing? Or are they different?
Had the same form. The appearance and structure of each was as of 2 wheels cutting through each other.
Wow.
Verse 22, above the heads of the creatures was a form, an expanse, with an awe-inspiring gleam as of crystal, was spread out above their heads. Under the expanse, each one had a pair of wings, extended toward those of the others, and each had another pair covering its body. From above the expanse over their heads came a sound. When they stood still, they would let their wings droop. Above the expanse over their heads was the semblance of a throne, in appearance like sapphire, and on top, upon this semblance of a throne, there was the semblance of a human form. From what appeared as his loins up, I saw a gleam as of amber, what looked like a fire encased in a frame. And from what appeared as his loins down, I saw what looked like fire. There was a radiance all about him. Now that we've read the relevant portions of the vision of Ezekiel 1, a couple of observations can be made. For instance, the creatures are unidentified in Ezekiel 1. We know, though, from Ezekiel 10, which records the vision in nearly identical terms, that the 4 creatures are cherubim.
Yep, them good old cherubim angels. I think it's just crazy that Ezekiel would have those visions. Have any of you guys had visions like that where you saw something completely paranormal, or you thought it was some extraterrestrial being or angelic being? Because it's always fascinating. Like, was Ezekiel talking about God with, he saw a person, like a being that was like in the shape of a person? Is that Jesus?
The description makes it clear that the cherubim and the wheels were not identical objects, though they are in some way related to each other. For instance, the cherubim have 4 faces. The wheels, of course, do not. The 4 faces were human, lion, ox, and eagle. Now, it doesn't take someone with great powers of observation to discern that Blumrich's drawing on his book cover fails to account for several features.
Yeah.
For instance,
I don't even know what he has. Like one little oval shape here. I don't think I use even the right stance, but the spaceship of Ezekiel. It takes 1 second to read this to draw something that actually is what Ezekiel saw, or, something similar.
Where are the cherubim? Where are the four faces? Where are the calves' hooves? All of these details are plainly articulated in the text of Ezekiel 1, and we know that because we just read through it. These omissions are especially curious since Blumrich had basic tools at his disposal to analyze the text of Ezekiel. For example, he could have looked up the original Hebrew words behind the English words using an interlinear Bible or a Hebrew lexicon. A lexicon is a kind of dictionary. Now, I knew what these tools were as a teenager, but somehow Blumrich just didn't know about them or was unaware of them. I would say that these are very basic tools that even a NASA engineer should have known about and, of course, could have used. Now, what is going on as far as the omission of data like this? The fact is that scholars who deal in the biblical text, who aren't NASA engineers, but their field is biblical studies, they know what Ezekiel saw. They know what the text says. Blumrich either didn't and was ignorant of very basic tools, or he didn't want his readers to know. We can have a secure knowledge of what Ezekiel saw in terms of the appearance and function of the cherubim in biblical and ancient Near Eastern thought.
This is my thought process. Whatever that guy's name is said, there's something weird in Ezekiel. Let's write a book about aliens and say that the Bible talks about something weird. That's what I feel. And usually it doesn't work out for them, but
things are actually very well known. The term cherubim comes from the Akkadian or the Babylonian term kuribu. Cherubim in Mesopotamian and Old Testament texts are described in distinct ways. They are guardians of sacred space. They guard the sacred space, the territory of a deity, or the throne room of a deity from defilement. They support the throne of a deity, and this is what we saw in Ezekiel chapter 1. They support the throne of God, which is portrayed as a heavenly chariot throne. Again, these elements are very well known and very easily discerned from Ezekiel chapter 1 that we just read. Now we know what this stuff looked like as far as the description, the words of Ezekiel 1. It looks nothing like Blumrich has on his cover. But you might still ask, well, let's be fair. How do you know? How do you know what the thing that Ezekiel described actually looked like? Well, it may sound startling, but we actually do know what it looked like because we have pictures. Now, it might sound kind of crazy to say that we actually have pictures of what Ezekiel...
He has pictures? Okay, I want to see these right away. Please, 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 please show me.
...saw. You'd think, well, how is that possible? They don't have cameras back in the days of the Babylonian Empire. And of course, you'd be correct. What I'm talking about is iconography, sculpture, paintings, that sort of thing.
Wow.
We do have very specific pictures of thrones that conform quite well to what Ezekiel saw, cherubim thrones that are from Babylon and Syro-Palestine. We have this material, but again, a lot of people don't take advantage of that. They don't know that it exists, and Blumrich was one of them. Let's look first, though, at what Ezekiel said, just to refresh these things in our minds. Above the four cherubim, Ezekiel said there was an expanse that supported a throne. Specifically, his wording was, above the expanse over their heads was the semblance of a throne. Ezekiel saw a deity in the form of a man, verses 26 and 27, seated on a throne that was positioned atop a circular throne platform supported by cherubim. Now, if we look at Blumrich's picture again from the cover of his book, note again that he misses all of these details.
Yep.
There's no throne atop an expanse or a platform. Again, obviously there's no cherubim. He completely ignores the actual details of Ezekiel's descriptions. Now, if you doubt that what is being described in Ezekiel 1 is in fact a throne, you might point out, well, the word throne's not used in Ezekiel 1. Well, you'd be right about that observation, but you'd be wrong that it isn't a throne. And we can tell that very clearly from another description of God's throne that matches what we see in Ezekiel 1. I'm speaking here of the book of Daniel, which is also set in Babylon, just like Ezekiel 1.
Wow.
The book of Daniel, in Daniel chapter 7, records a vision of the prophet. He has his own vision of the throne room and the throne of God, and he describes it this way. It's going to sound awfully familiar. As I looked on, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His garment was like white snow, and the hair of his head was like lamb's wool. His throne was tongues of flame. Its wheels were blazing fire. Again, that ought to sound very familiar from Ezekiel chapter.
That's mind-blowing. Its wheels were blazing fire. And just to think about, if there were actually aliens visiting Earth, I'm pretty sure that there would be a little bit more writings about this. Aliens would not become a popular thing until like the 60s and the 1960s, not 2,000 years ago. Some people say, oh, they were called gods back then. I don't think so.
Now you still might be thinking, well, we still don't know exactly what that would look like because we don't have pictures. Again, let me correct you. We do have pictures. We have iconography and sculpture of the day, of the period in which Ezekiel wrote. All of the elements in Ezekiel's description are visible, except one, and we'll get to that a little bit later because it's important to interpreting the vision. Now, taking a look at these pictures of royal thrones in the ancient Near Eastern world, again from Syria, Palestine, and of course Babylon, you can see that specifically they account for all of the elements in Ezekiel's vision. We have cherubim with wings, we have deities, divine beings with 4 faces. We have situations where we get a throne that incorporates hooves and calves' legs. All of these elements drawn from Ezekiel 1 show up in what essentially are the pictures, the photographs of the day.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. Obviously, they had depictions on walls and everything of things that were going on during that time. That's a great point. Shout out to Dr. Michael Heiser for debunking this guy.
Sculptures, carvings, paintings. We know what Ezekiel saw because we have this material. And it's very important that we recognize the importance of reading Ezekiel, again set in Babylon, in both a Babylonian and an Israelite context, with material known from the prophet's own day, and of course, known by the original audience to which he was writing. Now, despite all of this correlation between the text of Ezekiel 1, and we'll just throw Daniel 7 in there, and ancient Near Eastern iconography, again, allowing us to really know what Ezekiel and Daniel saw, an ancient astronaut theorist might be prompted at this point to ask a fairly obvious question. Well, what about the eyes in Ezekiel's vision? You didn't mention the eyes. And you're right, I didn't. True. This is the one omission of detail that I alluded to earlier. Note that the wheels, not the cherubim, but the wheels in Ezekiel 1 are described in verse 19 this way. Their rims were tall and frightening, for the rims of all 4 were covered all over with eyes.
Wow.
Now, the version of the vision...
That's crazy. That's where people get those massive eyes with wings, I think, in all those chat GPT pictures.
We get in Ezekiel 10. Remember, Ezekiel 10 is where we find out that these are cherubim. That version adds that the eyes were also covering the creatures, the cherubim themselves. Now, that the eyes were within the heavenly throne creatures is an important interpretive clue to the meaning of the vision, and that these creatures are somehow associated with the wheels is also important, again, to the right interpretation. Now, in his commentary on the book of Ezekiel, Old Testament scholar Daniel Block notes that the word translated eyes in Hebrew ayin, in Ezekiel 1, 17 and 18, quote, had been used earlier for sparkle or gleam in verses 4 and 16.
Wait,
now,
what?
Sparkling and gleaming are...
Seriously? So they just translated it? Is that correct, guys? Instead of eyes, they use sparkle and gleam. So they're saying like that was just to show that it was beautiful, sparkly. What? That doesn't make sense. Could be blown away here.
Of course, familiar descriptions for stars throughout ancient literature. Bloch elsewhere makes the important observation that the four faces of the cherubim in Ezekiel's vision correspond, and I would say not coincidentally, to the four signs for the cardinal direction points in the Babylonian zodiac. Now, this imagery about the eyes in the heavenly creatures were not overlooked by the Apostle John in the New Testament. In the heavenly throne scene in Revelation 4 and 5, John borrows this terminology from Ezekiel and other elements of Ezekiel 1 as well to describe the heavenly creatures who were, quote, full of eyes in front and behind. That's Revelation 4:6. Now, other scholars, aside from Bloch, such as Pilch and Malina, have noted something important about this. They write, quote, the ancients called stars eyes and thought them to be living entities. Constellated stars called full of eyes were perceived as animate beings like persons or animals. Since Ezekiel sees all four constellations moving at once, again in a wheel, in a circle, his vantage point was high above the entire cosmos in verses 4 through 11 in Ezekiel 1. Now, what Ezekiel was looking at...
That kind of makes sense because, like, really eyes everywhere, front and back, moving forward, all around. But if they were, like, seen as stars, that right there, my friend, is why I am learning all of this.
Constellations moving through the heavens in their regular cyclic path around like a wheel. That the four faces of the cherubim are the cardinal points of the Babylonian zodiac would make perfect sense if this is a vision of constellations. So what's the point? What's the point with the vision?
Yeah.
Now, if we care to interpret Ezekiel's vision in its own Babylonian and Israelite contexts, it's crystal clear that it has nothing to do with spaceships and ancient astronauts.
True.
Rather, the wheels within wheels and the chariot throne vision is a way of symbolically describing the stars in constellations in their courses, their regular courses. And constellations do what? They mark time. They mark the passage of epochs in history. The messaging of Ezekiel 1 has a very specific aim. Ezekiel's vision proclaims to the captives from Judah, exiled in Babylon, that the heavenly king, the deity on the throne, the God of Israel, Yahweh, who controls the cycles of time and history, which again the patterns of the stars make, is ultimately in control of their destiny. Their destiny is not under the control of the Babylonian deity Marduk.
That's amazing. If that's a really good description of Ezekiel, that is awesome. And so true that God is in control of time. He is the King of Kings. He is the Lord of Lords. He is on the throne. He's the ruler of all things. We don't have to worry. We can trust in God and rely on Him. The Bible's so amazing. It's so fascinating, and I love to learn more and more. So shout out to Dr. Michael Heiser for explaining all of this. It's mind-blowing stuff, 100%. And we can be sure that the Bible is reliable. We don't have to be afraid. We don't have to worry when someone comes at us and says, the Bible is fake, it's fraud, it's mistranslated, all this junk. It's not true. The Bible is reliable. We can trust in what it says to know about God and how amazing and vast and wonderful He is. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you've never decided to follow Jesus, I encourage you to do that. In the description below, you can click a link to help you to decide to follow Jesus for the first time. I encourage you to do that today. And always remember, guys, Jesus loves you.